The morning of the funeral smelled like rain and lilies. Clara stood by the church steps, the damp wind catching the hem of her black dress. Her fingers dug into the handle of the umbrella she wasn't using. She couldn't bring herself to open it, like she deserved to feel the rain. Inside, the pews were already filling. Faces she barely recognized, distant cousins, her mother's old co-workers, approached her with rehearsed sympathy. "So sorry for your loss. She was such a lovely woman." Every condolence sounded like a line from a play. Clara nodded through it, her expression steady. She'd had months to rehearse this calm. Evelyn Ellison had been the center of everything. The kind of mother who remembered birthdays no one else did, who showed up with soup the moment you coughed over the phone. When cancer took her, it felt like someone had lifted the roof off the house and left everyone standing in the weather. Her father, Daniel, sat in the front pew, hunched and silent, his broad hands trembling around a folded handkerchief. Clara wanted to sit beside him, but she couldn't yet. She needed a second to breathe before the real storm arrived. Because she knew they were coming. Lila and Nathan. Her sister and the man she was supposed to marry. 7 years had passed since the day they'd vanished from her life, their betrayal cutting a canyon between them so deep she hadn't dared to look across it. She told herself she was ready to face them now, that time had turned the wound into a scar, but her heart knew better. The church doors creaked open. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind over tall grass. There they were. Lila first, in a fitted black dress, her hair perfectly curled, expression carefully composed. Nathan trailed a step behind her, tall, handsome, and uncomfortable. The last time Clara had seen his face, he'd been begging her to understand something that had no explanation. The sight of them together made her throat close. She turned toward the stained glass window instead, the Virgin Mary haloed in blue light, and forced her breath steady. Not here, she told herself. Not at Mom's funeral. Still, when they reached the front, Lila's perfume drifted close. "Clara," she said softly. I'm so sorry." Clara met her sister's eyes for the first time in 7 years. They were the same deep hazel they'd shared since childhood, but now they looked older, tighter around the edges. "Thank you," Clara managed, the word tasting like metal. Nathan murmured something too, she barely heard it. Then they moved past her, settling on the other side of their father. She thought she'd feel fury, or disgust, or something hot enough to burn through the grief. Instead, there was only this strange emptiness, like all the anger had already been spent long ago. As the pastor began to speak, his voice echoing in soft, mournful tones, Clara's mind drifted. 7 years earlier it had started like every other fairy tale. She'd been 28, working as a marketing executive in downtown Boston, living in a neat apartment with big windows and bigger dreams. When she met Nathan Hale at a charity gala, it felt like the beginning of the life she'd been building toward her whole 20s. He had that kind of confidence that made you feel safe standing next to him. A smile that could turn a room into sunlight. Within months, their lives were entangled, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, rooftop dinners, the inevitable proposal that came with a ring too big for her trembling fingers. Her mother had cried with joy. Her father had shaken Nathan's hand so hard his knuckles popped. Even Lila had seemed happy. That last part, Clara now realized, had been an illusion. Lila was 3 years younger, the restless type who never seemed satisfied with her own life. She'd bounced between jobs, relationships, and cities, always chasing something shinier. Still, when Clara asked her to be maid of honor, she'd agreed instantly, claiming she wanted to make it the wedding of the century. The warning signs came quietly. A lingering glance here. A laugh that lasted too long there. The way Nathan's phone always seemed to buzz when Clara wasn't around. But Clara, naive, hopeful, in love, refused to see what her gut was already screaming. Until the day she couldn't ignore it. It was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday. She decided to surprise Nathan at his office with lunch, something sweet and small after weeks of feeling distant from him. She remembered the way the receptionist's face changed when she saw her, the quick flicker of panic before the practiced smile. "Mr. Hale's in a meeting," the woman had said, blocking the hallway. "I'll wait." But Clara had already known. Something deep in her bones knew. When she opened the office door, the world split in two. Lila was there, her baby sister, the girl she'd once held hands with crossing the street, standing between Nathan's legs, his hands around her waist. They didn't even notice her at first. That stillness before they realized she was there would haunt her for years. Lila's face, paling. Nathan's voice, soft and pathetic, "Clara, this isn't what it looks like." But it was. It was exactly what it looked like. She remembered the way the air had left her chest, the lunch bag falling to the floor, the slow slide of her engagement ring as she twisted it off and dropped it on his desk. That night, she packed a suitcase and went home to her parents. Her mother held her while she sobbed until her eyes were raw. Her father sat in the corner, fists clenched, whispering, "I'll kill him." 3 months later, she left Boston altogether. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, just left a note on the kitchen table, "I need to start over." The memory faded like smoke, and she was back in the church, listening to the closing hymn. The pastor asked everyone to rise for the final prayer. Clara stood, her knees stiff, and watched her mother's casket being wheeled down the aisle. The white flowers on top trembled as the doors opened to the soft drizzle outside. Lila was crying, quietly, but real tears this time. Nathan's hand rested on her shoulder. Clara wondered, for the first time in years, what it must be like for them now. Were they happy? Did guilt ever wake them at night? Did Nathan ever think about the woman he left broken in her parents' living room while he built his empire with her sister? She didn't know. She didn't care to. When the ceremony ended, she found herself standing beside Lila again, the silence between them thick as fog. "I know this isn't the time," Lila whispered, eyes red. "But I'd like to talk. After everything's settled." Clara's instinct was to walk away. But something, her mother's voice, maybe, kept her still. "We'll see," she said quietly. As Lila nodded and turned away, Clara caught a glimpse of Nathan watching her from across the room. His expression was unreadable. For the first time since that day in his office, she didn't look away. Something inside her shifted then, small, but real. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the faintest beginning of release. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled new, like soil after a storm. Clara tilted her face up and let the wind hit her skin. She didn't know it yet, but that was the first moment of her rebirth. The first thing Clara noticed about Chicago was the sound. It wasn't like Boston's sharp, clipped hum, all urgency and ambition. Chicago had a heavier rhythm, a low mechanical pulse that moved through the city like a heartbeat. The L train screeched and sighed overhead, buses hissed along wet pavement, and beneath it all was the wind, always there, pressing against her coat as if to remind her she was someplace new. She'd arrived in early spring, dragging 2 suitcases and the ghost of her old life behind her. The sublet she found was small, a one-bedroom overlooking an alleyway that smelled faintly of coffee and exhaust. The walls were pale and bare, her furniture minimal. It was the first space she'd ever lived in that held nothing of her past. At first, she liked that. She liked the quiet, the anonymity. No one here knew her story, no whispers, no pitying looks, no one asking how she was holding up. She could be anyone she wanted. The trouble was, she didn't know who that was anymore. Work became her anchor. The Chicago branch of her firm was fast-paced, competitive, and mercifully indifferent to personal history. She threw herself into it, arriving early, staying late, taking every account no one else wanted. Her boss, a sharp woman named Trina, noticed. "You've got that East Coast fire," she told her once. Clara smiled like it was a compliment. But there were nights the silence got too loud. She'd come home to her empty apartment, heat some leftover noodles, and sit at the small table staring at her reflection in the dark window. Sometimes she'd imagine the version of her that never left Boston, the one who married Nathan, who smiled through charity galas and dinner parties, who maybe had a child by now. She'd picture that woman's perfect kitchen, her perfect life, and feel nothing but a dull ache. The city didn't care. It moved on, indifferent and alive. On weekends, she walked by Lake Michigan, letting the wind bite her cheeks. It reminded her she was still here, still capable of feeling something. Other people's laughter drifted from the walking path, couples holding hands, joggers with headphones. She tried not to envy them. Months passed like that, one gray day sliding into another. Then came the tech conference. Her company sent her to San Francisco to pitch a marketing proposal to a panel of investors. She expected nothing beyond exhaustion and jet lag, but the second evening, during a dinner event, she found herself seated next to Elias Ward. He wasn't what she expected from the investment world. No loud bragging, no expensive watch on display. He spoke quietly, choosing his words with care, asking about her work like he genuinely wanted to understand it. When she explained a strategy she'd developed for a digital campaign, he listened, really listened, and when she finished, he said, "That's clever. You see patterns other people miss." She laughed awkwardly. "It's literally my job to notice patterns." "Still," he said, smiling slightly. "It's rare." There was something steady about him, not the sparkling charm Nathan had wielded like a weapon, but a quiet steadiness that made her feel oddly grounded. By the end of the evening, he asked for her card. She handed it over, thinking she'd never hear from him again. The next morning, an email arrived, "Coffee before your flight? I'd like to keep our conversation going, no business pitch, I promise." She stared at it for a long time before typing back, "Sure." They met at a small cafe near the pier, the air smelling of salt and espresso. Conversation came easily, even when silence fell between them. When she mentioned she was from Boston, he nodded slowly. "I used to live there," he said. "Left after things got complicated." She didn't ask what that meant, and he didn't ask why her expression changed when she mentioned her family. After that, they kept in touch, at first professionally, exchanging client leads and project updates. But over time, their messages grew more personal. He'd send a photo of a Chicago sunset, she'd reply with one from her office window. They began meeting for lunch whenever he was in town. One afternoon, as they left a cafe, he said, "You know, for someone who talks about work all the time, you avoid talking about yourself." "I talk about myself plenty." He shook his head. "No, you talk about your schedule. There's a difference." She didn't know how to answer that, so she changed the subject. Clara's therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Marin, told her once that trauma doesn't end, it just changes shape. "You've built walls," Marin said during a session, "and you've convinced yourself their strength." Clara smiled thinly. "Walls keep me safe. They also keep people out." For a long time, she believed that was the price of survival. Until the night she had a panic attack during dinner with Elias. They'd gone to a quiet Italian place near the river. He'd been telling her about a project, something about green tech investments, when the candlelight caught the silver band on his hand. For a split second, her brain saw Nathan's hand instead, that same gleam of gold, that same confidence, and something inside her snapped. Her heart raced. Her vision blurred. She couldn't breathe. "Clara?" Elias's voice was calm, steady. "Hey, look at me. You're okay. Just breathe." She wanted to explain, to apologize, but all she could do was nod and focus on his voice. He didn't touch her, didn't rush her, just waited until her breathing slowed. When she could finally speak, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't even know what happened." "It's okay," he said gently. "You don't owe me an explanation." But she gave him one anyway. That night, sitting in his car outside her apartment, she told him everything. The betrayal. The broken engagement. The sister. The silence. The running away. She told him about her mother's illness, her father's fading strength, how she sometimes woke up in the middle of the night convinced she was still in that office doorway, watching her life collapse in slow motion. When she finished, he didn't give her pity or platitudes. He just said, "You didn't deserve that. None of it." Something in her chest loosened, a knot she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. The next day, a bouquet of wildflowers arrived at her office with a note, "No pressure, no expectations. Just glad you're still here." She kept the note tucked in her desk drawer. The months that followed weren't dramatic, but they mattered. Elias became a quiet constant in her life. He never demanded more than she could give. When she pulled away, he gave her space. When she doubted herself, he reminded her she didn't need to be anyone's definition of strong. They took things slowly, dinners, walks, small conversations that deepened into trust. One evening, sitting by the river, he said, "You know, people talk about love like it's supposed to fix you. But maybe it's just supposed to hold you while you do the work yourself." She turned that line over in her mind for weeks. When he finally kissed her, under the faint orange glow of a bridge light, it didn't feel like a beginning or an ending. It felt like breathing. By the time a year had passed, Clara hardly recognized the woman she'd been when she arrived. She'd earned a promotion, found friends who knew her as she was now, not who she used to be. Her apartment was full of color, framed photos, books stacked on every surface, a basil plant thriving on the windowsill. But what surprised her most wasn't how much she'd rebuilt, it was how little she missed the old life. Sometimes she caught herself laughing at something Elias said, and for a brief second, she'd think, Mom would love him. Then guilt would follow, sharp and sudden, because her mother's illness had only gotten worse, and Clara hadn't been home in nearly a year. She'd call every week, checking in, pretending everything was fine on both ends. Evelyn's voice always sounded bright, but there was a fatigue beneath it that scared Clara. Don't worry about me, her mother said once. You're finally happy, and that's what matters. But Clara could hear the unspoken part, for now. On the first anniversary of her move, Elias planned a trip to the wine country in Michigan. They stayed at a small bed and breakfast surrounded by vineyards, the air thick with the smell of grapes and summer rain. One evening, while they were walking through the rows of vines, he stopped and took her hands. I need to say this, he said quietly. I don't want to rush you, but I love you, Clara. Her breath caught. Not because she didn't feel it, she did, but because hearing the words again after so many years brought everything back. Elias must have seen it in her face. You don't have to say it back, he said softly. I just wanted you to know. She stood there for a long time, the twilight wrapping around them, the smell of earth and rain grounding her. And when she finally spoke, her voice was steady. I do love you, she said. It's just a different kind of love. The kind that doesn't hurt to carry. He smiled, pulling her close. That's the best kind. By the time they returned to Chicago, she knew this was the life she wanted. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. For the first time since the betrayal, Clara didn't feel like she was surviving. She was living. And yet, she had no idea the call that would soon drag her back to Boston, back to the past she thought she'd buried for good, was only days away. The call came on a gray Thursday morning. Clara was in her office, half listening to her team debate color palettes for a campaign, when her phone buzzed with her father's name. She almost ignored it, he rarely called during work hours, but something in her gut made her step into the hallway. Dad? There was a pause, the kind of pause that rearranges your world before the words even land. It's your mother, Daniel said, voice rough. The cancer's back. It's spreading. For a moment, the office walls seemed to close in around her. The steady hum of conversation faded, replaced by the pounding of her pulse. How bad? Bad enough that the doctors don't think treatment will do much this time. Clara pressed her hand to her forehead, leaning against the cool glass. I'll come home. You don't have to, I'm coming, she said, already grabbing her bag. By nightfall, she was on a plane to Boston, the city skyline shrinking beneath her until it was just a smear of lights on water. Elias sat beside her, hand resting over hers on the armrest. He didn't try to fill the silence. He knew better. When they landed, the chill of late autumn hit her the second she stepped out of the terminal. Boston hadn't changed, but she had, and the city felt both familiar and foreign at once. Her parents' house looked smaller than she remembered. The paint was chipped, the shutters in need of repair. But when her mother opened the door, everything else fell away. Evelyn still had that same radiant smile, though her frame had thinned, and her scarf did little to hide how fragile she'd become. My girl, she whispered, arms trembling as she hugged her. Clara clung to her, inhaling the scent of home, lavender detergent, faint perfume, and something like sunlight caught in fabric. Elias waited a respectful distance before introducing himself. Mrs. Ellison, he said warmly, it's good to finally meet you. Evelyn's eyes softened. Elias. I've heard so much about you. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. He smiled. She's the one who takes care of me, actually. That earned the first real laugh of the night. Dinner was quiet but full of small comforts, Daniel's homemade stew, the clinking of spoons, Evelyn asking questions about Chicago like she wasn't sitting in a body that had turned against her. When Clara offered to help with dishes, her mother waved her off. Sit with me. We don't get moments like this often anymore. Later that night, as Evelyn rested, Daniel poured 2 whiskeys in the kitchen. She's tougher than she looks, he said. But I can see it in her eyes, Clara. She's tired. Clara nodded, staring at the amber liquid in her glass. How long do they think she has? He hesitated. Months, maybe less. She swallowed hard. Does Lila know? Daniel's jaw tightened. Your mother called her first. Of course she did. Evelyn had never stopped believing her daughters would find their way back to each other. She said she'd come for the weekend, Daniel added. With Nathan. The name landed like a bruise. Even after all these years, it still held weight. Elias noticed her expression but said nothing. He simply reached across the table and squeezed her hand under the dim light. Lila arrived that Saturday morning in a sleek black SUV, Nathan behind the wheel. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine, her coat camel-colored, his watch gleaming, both faces perfectly composed. Clara had expected anger to rise, that familiar sting of betrayal, but when the car door opened, she felt something else entirely, distance. They looked like strangers. Lila hugged their mother gently, careful not to wrinkle her coat. Nathan handed over a bouquet of flowers too expensive to be sincere. When he turned to Clara, his smile flickered. "It's been a long time," he said. "Not long enough," Daniel muttered from the porch, loud enough to draw a nervous laugh from Lila. Elias stepped forward, his tone calm. "I'm Elias. Clara's husband." Nathan froze. The polite mask slipped just enough to reveal recognition and discomfort. "Elias Ward?" Clara frowned. "You two know each other?" "Old business circles," Elias said easily, his eyes never leaving Nathan's. "We've crossed paths before." Lila glanced between them, clearly confused, but no one pressed further. Evelyn, ever the peacemaker, ushered everyone inside with a weak smile. The weekend felt like walking through a minefield. Evelyn insisted on family meals, though she barely ate. Conversation hovered over safe topics, weather, work, old family friends. Whenever silence stretched too long, she filled it with gentle questions. "Lila, how's your house on Beacon Hill?" "Clara, is Chicago treating you well?" Neither daughter wanted to say what they were really thinking. "Mom, you're dying, and we've wasted years hating each other." On Sunday afternoon, Evelyn pulled Clara aside while the others were in the living room. "Promise me something," she whispered, her voice thin as tissue. "Anything. When I'm gone, don't let this rift stay open. You and your sister need to find your way back to each other. Mom, promise me." Clara felt her throat tighten. "I'll try. That's all I need to hear." Evelyn passed 3 months later, in her sleep, with Daniel holding one hand and Clara the other. The house fell silent in that heavy way that only happens when a person who filled it is gone. The funeral was set for the following week. By then, the shock had settled into something colder, grief braided with dread. Lila had offered to help plan the service, her tone clipped and professional, but every exchange between them felt rehearsed. When the day came, the church smelled of lilies and damp stone. People whispered condolences in the same practiced way they had at other funerals, but this time Clara felt detached from it all, like she was watching from underwater. Lila arrived late, her arm looped through Nathan's, their expensive sadness on full display. She hugged Clara briefly. "You look, well. So do you." "I'm sorry about Mom," Lila said. Her voice trembled slightly, and for a second, Clara almost believed her. Then she added, "She always said you were the strong one." The compliment landed like a disguised accusation. During the service, Clara spoke first, her eulogy soft and simple. She talked about her mother's laughter, her kindness, the way she made even small moments feel sacred. Her voice didn't crack until the very end, when she said, "She was the best part of us." When it was Lila's turn, she started confidently, but halfway through, her voice wavered. Words faltered. She froze. Without thinking, Clara rose and walked to her side. She placed a hand on her sister's back and whispered, "Take your time." Lila nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and finished the rest haltingly. When they sat down, she reached for Clara's hand under the pew, just for a second, and squeezed. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. After the burial, people gathered back at the house. Daniel sat in his chair by the window, worn and wordless. Nathan hovered awkwardly near the kitchen, pretending to check emails. Lila busied herself with the casserole dishes, but Clara saw her watching Elias, sizing him up, maybe trying to measure the life her sister had built against the one she'd chosen. When most guests had gone, Lila pulled Clara aside. "Can we talk?" Clara hesitated. "Now? Please. Just for a minute." They stepped into the den, the air thick with the smell of fading flowers. "I know this isn't the time," Lila began, voice brittle, "but I wanted to tell you. I'm happy. Nathan and I built something good. I hope you can be happy for me, too. Clara stared at her. The words didn't sting the way they might have years ago. Instead, she felt an odd kind of pity. Lila's eyes looked tired beneath the makeup, her smile stretched too tight. I am happy, Clara said calmly. Truly. I have a good life. Lila's gaze flicked toward the hallway, where Elias stood speaking quietly with Daniel. He seems different. He is. Lila nodded, forcing a small smile. Well. I suppose we both got what we wanted. Clara tilted her head. Did we? Lila blinked, thrown off. Before she could answer, Nathan appeared at the door, impatience flickering across his face. Lila, we should go. She followed him out, and as they reached the porch, Clara caught a flash of something on Nathan's face, not triumph, not regret, but unease. She didn't understand it then, but she would soon enough. That night, when the last guest had left and the house had gone quiet, Clara sat in her mother's old chair. She could still smell Evelyn's perfume on the fabric. Elias came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. She'd be proud of you, he said softly. For what? For coming back. Clara stared at the framed family photo on the mantel, taken before everything fell apart. Her mother smiling between her two daughters, her father's hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Coming back doesn't mean I'm whole, she said. No, Elias agreed. But it means you're not running anymore. Outside, the streetlight flickered in the mist, and Clara realized he was right. She hadn't returned for closure, she'd returned for truth. And something told her the truth hadn't finished with her yet. The morning after the funeral, the house was unnervingly still. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and rain, the sound of her father moving slowly around the kitchen. She sat up on the couch where she'd fallen asleep, her body heavy from exhaustion. The framed photos on the wall looked different now, as if every face inside them knew something she didn't. Elias was already dressed, reading emails on his phone. When he looked up, his expression softened. You didn't sleep much. I didn't want to, she said. It felt wrong. Like the house would forget she was gone if I stayed awake. He crossed the room and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. You'll need rest soon. Grief catches up in strange ways. Clara managed a small smile. You sound like my therapist. She sounds smart. Daniel shuffled in, still in his robe, a mug shaking slightly in his hand. I'm heading to your uncle's for dinner later. He wants to help sort through the funeral bills. Okay, Clara said. I'll stay here, go through some of Mom's things. She'd hate the idea of us leaving everything in boxes. He nodded, eyes glassy. She always said clutter meant unfinished business. After he left, the house felt even emptier. The ticking clock over the mantel sounded like a heartbeat. Clara started in her mother's bedroom, opening drawers carefully, touching each item like it might crumble. Scarves folded with precision. Handwritten notes tucked into jewelry boxes. Perfume bottles half full, their scents preserved like ghosts. When she opened the nightstand, a small leather-bound journal slid forward. Its cover was soft and worn at the edges. A slip of paper poked out from between the pages, Evelyn's neat handwriting, for my girls. Clara's breath hitched. She sat on the bed and opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. The first entries were mundane, grocery lists, notes about doctor appointments, garden reminders. Then, slowly, the words deepened. June 4th, the treatments aren't working. I can see it in their eyes when they tell me we'll keep trying. I'm not afraid to go. I'm afraid to leave them like this, two daughters who can't look at each other without remembering the wreckage. I want to believe love is enough to fix what pride has broken. Further down the page, if they ever read this, I hope they know I see both of them, not the mistakes, but the ache underneath. Clara runs because she thinks distance will save her. Lila clings because she's terrified of being left behind. They're both fighting ghosts. By the time she reached the last entry, Clara's tears were falling freely. I pray they find their way back to each other somehow. That they learn forgiveness isn't surrender, it's the only way to start again. She closed the journal and sat there for a long while, the words pulsing through her chest. Then the doorbell rang. Through the rain-streaked window, she saw Lila's car parked in the driveway. Nathan's usual luxury SUV was nowhere in sight. Clara hesitated, her first instinct to hide. But then she remembered the note on the journal cover, for my girls. When she opened the door, Lila stood there drenched, her umbrella forgotten. Her mascara had run slightly, and her expression wasn't the polished one she'd worn at the funeral. It was raw. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small. Clara stepped aside. "Yeah. Of course." They sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from 2 untouched cups of coffee. The silence stretched between them until it became unbearable. Finally, Lila spoke. "Nathan doesn't know I'm here." Clara glanced up. "Should he?" "No." Lila swallowed hard. "I read Mom's journal. Dad showed it to me last night. She wanted us to," her voice cracked, "to find peace." "I found it this morning," Clara said quietly. "She wrote about us. About how we're both haunted." Lila gave a shaky laugh. "Haunted feels right." Clara waited. Lila's fingers twisted around her mug. "I'm miserable, Clara. I have been for years." Clara blinked. She hadn't expected confession, not from Lila, whose entire identity had always been control and gloss. After the wedding, everything looked perfect on the outside. But Nathan changed. "Maybe he always was that way and I didn't see it. He's cold. Critical. He monitors everything, my spending, my phone, my friends. Half of what we have is built on debt. He's been drowning the company for years, pretending it's thriving." Her voice broke on a sob. "He treats me like a mistake he can't return." Clara didn't speak. She didn't even know if she could. Lila wiped her eyes. "I know I deserve some of it. Maybe all of it. I ruined your life because I thought taking him would make me whole. But he's like a mirror, Clara. He reflects every ugly thing inside me. I wake up next to him and I hate what I see." The confession hung in the air, heavy and trembling. "Why are you telling me this now?" Clara asked. "Because Mom's gone," Lila whispered. "And I can't keep pretending. I'm leaving him." Clara stared at her sister, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, she saw not the rival, not the betrayer, but the same scared girl who used to crawl into her bed after nightmares. She exhaled slowly. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Lila nodded. "A lawyer. I've been preparing for months. I didn't want to do it while she was still alive." The rain outside grew heavier, streaking against the windows. Clara got up and retrieved the journal from the living room. She placed it on the table between them. "You should read the rest." She understood more than we ever gave her credit for. Lila flipped through the pages, tears falling onto the paper. "She saw everything," she whispered. "All the ways we hurt each other." "She always did," Clara said. For a long time, they sat together in silence, the storm filling the spaces between their words. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something fragile and alive, a beginning. When the clock chimed 6, Lila stood, pulling her coat around her shoulders. "I'll go. You need rest." Clara followed her to the door. "What will you do next?" "I'll file for divorce," Lila said. "Find a place that's mine. Start over." She hesitated, then added, "You look happy, you know. With Elias." "It's good to see." Clara smiled faintly. "I am happy." Lila nodded, eyes glistening. "One of us should be." They hugged, awkward, brief, but real. When Lila stepped into the rain, Clara watched her go until the car disappeared around the corner. That night, Clara found herself back in her mother's room, sitting on the edge of the bed. Elias called from Chicago, his voice warm through the static. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Everything feels heavier now, but in a different way. Like the grief's turning into something else." "Maybe that's what healing looks like," he said. "It changes shape before it leaves you." She thought about that long after they hung up. Before going to bed, she tucked her mother's journal into her suitcase. It felt like a map, not out of the pain, but through it. Weeks passed. Lila filed for divorce quietly, without the spectacle that used to define her life. Word spread through Boston social circles, and people whispered. But for once, Lila didn't care. She moved into a small apartment downtown and took a job at a modest marketing firm. She and Clara exchanged short messages at first, photos of their mother's garden blooming again, recipes Evelyn used to make, fragments of normal conversation that carried more weight than either admitted. One evening, Clara received a text from her sister, "Thank you for not hating me." She typed back, "I did. For a long time. But not anymore." And somehow, that simple truth felt like freedom. The last of Evelyn's things were finally packed away by summer. Daniel insisted Clara take her mother's old sewing box, a wooden chest carved with ivy vines. Inside, she found a single note folded beneath the spools of thread. "You were never meant to carry the past forever, Clara. Let it make you wiser, not smaller." She smiled through tears. Later that night, she called Lila. "Mom left another note." "Oh?" "It was for me this time. But I think it's for both of us." "What did it say?" "That it's time to stop carrying the past." There was a pause, then Lila said quietly, "Then maybe it's time we stop living like ghosts." Clara looked out the window, the moon reflected on the glass. Maybe it is. She didn't know it yet, but the next season would bring its own kind of miracle, one that would test everything she'd learned about love, forgiveness, and the art of beginning again. The storm had passed, but the soil was still damp, ready for something new to grow. The first snow of the season came late that year. It dusted Chicago in silence, the kind of snow that swallowed sound and made even the traffic seem gentle. Clara woke before dawn and stood by the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the flakes drift down under the streetlight. Elias stirred behind her. "You're awake already?" She smiled faintly. "Couldn't sleep." He rose, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You've been staring out there every morning this week," he murmured. "Waiting for something?" "Maybe," she said. Then, after a beat, "I think I'm just grateful. It's been a long time since winter felt peaceful." He kissed her temple. "Peace looks good on you." His words settled in her chest like warmth spreading through cold hands. It had been almost 6 months since her mother's death, 3 since her conversation with Lila in the rain. The grief was still there, quieter now, but deep, like an undercurrent she'd learned to live with. Some days it still caught her off guard, in the smell of lavender, in the sound of a hymn her mother used to hum, in the way light fell through the window exactly as it had in her childhood home. But alongside it had come something else. Life. Real, ordinary, fragile life. Elias had been painting the spare room for weeks. The walls, once a dull beige, were now a soft green, the shade Clara had once dreamed of for no reason she could name. When he asked her why that color, she'd said, "Because it feels alive." That room had been meant for visiting family, an office, maybe a reading nook. But one quiet morning in September, Clara had taken a pregnancy test she didn't expect to be positive. She'd stood in the bathroom, staring at the small pink line, her heart pounding so hard she thought the sound might wake Elias. When she finally told him, his reaction wasn't dramatic, no cinematic joy or loud exclamations. He simply exhaled, stepped forward, and pressed his forehead to hers. "We're really doing this," he whispered. "We're really starting something new." She laughed through tears. "You make it sound like we're building a company." "In a way, we are," he said. "The most important one." Now, as she watched him in that half-painted room, sleeves rolled up and a streak of green across his cheek, she thought of her mother's words, "Let it make you wiser, not smaller." This, she realized, was what she'd been working toward all along. Not revenge. Not closure. Renewal. Lila called more often now. Their conversations were still cautious, but lighter. She sounded different, softer somehow, less performative. Gone was the brittle confidence that used to frame every sentence. One evening, Clara called her while sitting on the couch, a blanket draped over her lap. "How's the new job?" she asked. Lila laughed lightly. "Busy. But I like it. It's strange, actually earning something that's mine." Clara smiled. "That's how it starts. The pride sneaks up on you." "And you?" "I'm good. Tired. A little nauseous, actually." Lila paused. "Wait. Are you?" Clara grinned. "Pregnant." The silence that followed was so full it almost hummed. Then Lila's voice cracked through the line. "Clara, that's amazing." "It feels unreal," Clara admitted. "I wasn't sure it would ever happen." Lila sniffled. "Mom would have been over the moon." "I know. Have you thought about names?" "Not yet. I'm waiting to feel the right one." Lila hesitated. Can I come visit? I'd like to see you. If you're okay with that. Clara didn't have to think long. Yeah, she said softly. I'd like that. Lila arrived 2 weeks later with a suitcase and a nervous smile. The moment she stepped into the apartment, her eyes widened. You have a view of the river. And that smell, is that lemon and paint? Elias laughed from the hallway. A winning combination. They hugged awkwardly, then less awkwardly, and soon they were sitting at the kitchen table with tea and old memories. Lila walked through the apartment slowly, taking in the details, the books stacked along the walls, the framed photo of Evelyn in the hallway, the soft hum of life that filled the space. She'd love it here, she said. She'd tell me to dust more, Clara replied. They both laughed, the sound small and startled, like testing something that might still break. Later, Lila asked to see the nursery. Clara hesitated, then led her down the hallway. The green walls glowed in the afternoon light. A rocking chair sat by the window, a folded quilt draped over the armrest, the same quilt their mother had made decades ago, now freshly mended. Lila touched it gently. I can't believe you still have this. I almost gave it away once, Clara said. Now I can't imagine not having it. Lila turned toward her, eyes bright. You're going to be such a good mom. I hope so. She'd be proud, Lila whispered. Clara's throat tightened. Of both of us, I think. They stood there in the quiet, surrounded by the faint smell of paint and possibility. That night, after Lila went to bed in the guest room, Clara sat on the couch with her mother's journal in her lap. She'd read it so many times she knew parts by heart, but she still turned the pages slowly, as though expecting Evelyn's handwriting to shift into something new. Elias came over, settling beside her. You keep going back to that, he said gently. She knew us better than we knew ourselves. He nodded, resting his hand over hers. You think Lila's really going to stay? I think she might. They sat in silence, listening to the wind whip against the windows. She told me tonight she's scared, Clara said after a while. Not of being alone. Of repeating everything. Of building something just to lose it again. Elias leaned his head back, thoughtful. Then she's already halfway healed. Fear means she knows what matters now. Clara smiled faintly. You always make things sound simpler than they are. Not simpler, he said. Just clearer. She rested her head on his shoulder, feeling the slow, steady rise of his breath. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't scare her. Spring came late to Chicago that year, but when it arrived, it came all at once. The trees burst into bloom almost overnight, soft petals drifting like snowflakes across the sidewalks. Clara's belly rounded gently beneath her dress as she walked through the park near their apartment, her hand resting instinctively over the small, steady rhythm of new life. Lila joined her sometimes, bringing coffee and easy conversation. I found Mom's old recipe for lemon cake, Lila said one morning, handing her a folded sheet of paper. Remember how she used to make it when we were little? She'd always say it tasted like sunshine. Clara smiled. We should bake it when the baby's born. We will, Lila promised. There was no grand declaration between them, no formal apology or apology accepted. Just small moments stitched together, laughter, shared silences, the kind of sisterhood built not on forgetting but on choosing again and again to stay. The baby came in June, after a long night of thunder and rain. When the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms, Clara's first thought wasn't of the past, not of Nathan, or the pain, or even the years she'd lost. It was of her mother's hands, steady and warm, the way she'd always said life was just a series of beginnings in disguise. Elias leaned close, eyes wet. She looks like you, he whispered. She looks like hope, Clara said. They named her Evelyn Grace, after the woman who had loved them both into becoming who they were. Weeks later, Lila came to visit again, a soft toy tucked under her arm. When she held the baby, her expression cracked into something Clara hadn't seen since they were children, unguarded joy. She's perfect, Lila whispered. You did it, Clara. You really did. Clara smiled. We both did. Somehow, we both made it out. Lila's eyes shimmered. Mom would say we found our way back. Yeah, Clara murmured. She'd be right. Outside, sunlight spilled through the window, catching on the green walls of the nursery. The air smelled faintly of rain and lemon cake cooling in the kitchen. Elias hummed softly while painting tiny stars above the crib, gold and silver against the green, and Clara leaned back in the rocking chair, her daughter asleep in her arms. Lila sat nearby, reading aloud from one of their mother's old journals, her voice low and steady. When the baby stirred, Clara looked down and whispered, "You came from all of this, the breaking, the forgiving, the beginning again. You're proof that love can survive anything." The baby shifted, tiny fingers curling around hers. For the first time in a long time, Clara didn't feel haunted by what she'd lost. She felt rooted. Grounded in the life she'd chosen, the family she'd rebuilt, the forgiveness she'd fought for. Her world wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was alive. That night, when the house finally went quiet, Clara stepped out onto the balcony. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. She looked up at the stars Elias had painted, now mirrored by the ones above the city, and thought of her mother, of Evelyn's last wish, written in looping script, "I pray they find their way back to each other somehow." Clara smiled softly. "We did, Mom," she whispered. "We found our way." And for the first time in 7 long years, Clara Ellison didn't feel like she was standing in the ruins of her past. She felt reborn. The baby was 6 months old when Elias finally told her the whole story. It was late, the city outside wrapped in the soft hum of winter. Clara sat on the living room floor, the monitor beside her, a faint static whispering from the nursery. Elias was stretched out on the couch, a half-empty glass of wine in his hand, the lamplight painting his face in amber and shadow. He'd been quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that had weight to it. Then he said, almost absently, "You never asked what made me move to Chicago." Clara looked up. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." He smiled, the corners of his mouth tilting with something like gratitude. "I lost everything. That's the short version." She waited, not pushing, the way he'd done for her years ago. "I was married once," he began. "We started a tech company together. I thought we were building something solid, a life, a legacy. Turns out she was building an exit plan. When the company got its first big investment, she left. Took her shares, my partner, and half the team with her." Clara's breath caught. "You never told me that." "I didn't want to make my pain your mirror," he said softly. "I didn't want you to look at me and see more betrayal." "What did you do?" "What everyone does after something breaks," he said. "I tried to fix it. Spent 2 years chasing lawsuits and closure. Then one morning, I woke up and realized I'd built my whole life around trying to prove I was worth staying for. That was the day I left Seattle." He paused, staring at the ceiling. "When I met you in San Francisco, I recognized something in you right away. That look people get when they've survived a fire and aren't sure they want to build again." Clara smiled faintly. "We were both ash then." "Yeah," he said, a soft laugh escaping. "Two burnt-out hearts pretending to be fine." They fell quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that didn't hurt. The baby stirred in the next room, a faint, muffled whimper, then quieted again. Elias turned his head toward her. "You know what's strange? I don't hate her anymore. My ex. I used to, for a long time. But now I think, she was my version of your Nathan. The person who forced me to learn who I was when everything was gone." Clara leaned against the couch, resting her chin on her knees. "Maybe that's the real trick of love, not finding the one who saves you, but finding someone who's already done the work of saving themselves." He reached for her hand. "That's us, then. Two people who built from the rubble." "More like planted something new," she said. He smiled, thumb brushing against her ring. "You're mixing metaphors again." "I'm allowed," she said, laughing softly. "I'm raising a human now." He grinned, then looked past her toward the nursery door. "She's going to have a good life, Clara. Not perfect. But good. Because she'll grow up watching her parents choose kindness over pride." Clara's throat tightened. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. "You turned your pain into something alive. That's rare." She studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the gentleness that seemed carved into him. For the first time, she saw him not just as the man who caught her when she was falling, but as someone who had fallen, too, and learned to stand again. She reached out, resting her hand over his heart. "You talk about me healing. But you did, too." He covered her hand with his own. "I think we just did it together." The baby let out a small cry, the kind that sounded more curious than upset. Clara stood, and Elias followed her into the nursery. The soft green walls glowed faintly in the nightlight's golden hue. The stars he'd painted still shimmered above the crib. Clara lifted Evelyn gently, pressing her to her chest. The baby's head nestled under her chin, warm and solid and real. Elias wrapped his arms around them both, his chin resting against her hair. Outside, snow fell again, slow, steady, soundless. Clara whispered, "We came through so much to get here." Elias kissed the side of her head. "That's what makes it beautiful." She looked down at their daughter, at the tiny rise and fall of her breath. "Do you ever think about the people who hurt us?" she asked. "Sometimes," he said. "But not the way I used to. They're just part of the soil now. They made us who we are, but they don't define what grows from it." Clara smiled, her eyes wet. "So this is the bloom." "This is the bloom," he echoed. They stood there for a long while, the world outside muffled by snow, their daughter sleeping between them, and the ghosts of the past fading at last into memory. It wasn't a perfect life. It was a whole one. And for Clara Ellison and Elias Ward, that was more than enough.